being there. It's a power shift now. Out with the Jews. It's a big deal. And then now we have Christianity. Now with the Jews, you can look and say, okay, these people are, the Jews, which would be black people. And then, they begin to mix in and so on and so forth. And we get to where we have Arabs and white people as far as Judaism. But with Christianity, it could be anybody. So as far as Jews, you will understand who those people are. But with Christianity now coming in, and this is important to understand because they use Christianity, even though they don't want to say it. They didn't want to say it then. They're saying it now. The Pope came out and admitted, and apologized for the Pope's or the Vatican's involvement in the slave trade. But bigger than that, you got to understand that the establishment of these kingdoms and them going out and doing the conquering was based on Christianity. They're not going to say it. They don't teach it in schools. They don't want to, say it that this is something that we should go back and look at and validate, because if we're doing all this conquering and we establish all this on Christianity, on the basis of Christianity, is Christianity true? And it's something that they don't touch on. But it says here, Christianity was one of the justifications that European powers used to colonize and exploit Africa through the dissemination of Christian doctrine. European nations such as Great Britain, France, and the Netherlands sought to educate and reform African culture. In his book, A History of Africa, scholar J.D. Fage describes the racially based logic of European intellectuals and missionaries, saying, mid to late 19th century Europeans were generally convinced that their Christian, scientific, and industrial society was intrinsically far superior to anything that Africa had produced. Unfamiliar with the diverse cultures on the continent of Africa, European explorers viewed practices unfamiliar to them as lesser and savage. And this is what some people accepted as, being right and true because Europeans said so. It's like I said before, who defines sophistication? Who defines what's intelligent or sophisticated? And we go by what they interpret it to be. To many European nations, Christianity represented Western civilization and the basis for Anglo-Saxon morality. Christianity served as a major force in the partition and eventual colonization of Africa. During the late 19th century, European nations increasingly viewed the global power. In an attempt to augment political and regional influence, nations like Great Britain and France needed a justification for expansion. So if you're going to expand, and again, how do you convince people to go out and help you expand? Okay, you're going to pay people money for whatever, but how do you also convince these people that this is just a society that's supposed to be sophisticated? We need to go out and do this. Okay, well, let's go and take the savage land from these savages on the basis of Christianity, and that our ancestors, which they believe is theirs, went out and conquered and took land from people, tribes or what have you, who was doing the wrong thing, worshiping, devils and demons or what have you. So we're going to justify this by going to go take this land. But really, it's under the guise of they want to expand. Essentially, Christianity was a guise by which Western governments justified the exploitation and conquest of African nations. In the poem, The White Man's Burden, poet Rudyard Kipling exclaims, "Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness ease." Originally denoted as a reference to United States imperialism in the Philippines, the Anglo-centric basis of the poem holds true to the root structure of imperialist ideology, denouncing the religious practices of Africans as witchcraft and heathenism. European nations sought to convert and then exploit the indigenous people of Africa. So when I showed you guys Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and them going out there and basically conquering these South African or South American places, these islands, Taino people, so on and so forth, this is what they was doing. Remember, they was putting them on a cross and burning them at the stake for not converting to Christianity, saying whatever they was doing was evil and wrong. It was crazy. And this is one of the things, if you remember, well, if you my age, I'm 40 now. If you remember, you go back. This is something that we talked about back in the day. We were saying that, African people are savages. This is stuff that we really believed until we start later seeing how developed Africa is. and what was taking place there. But we just thought they was running around butt naked with bones in their lip. I talk about that all the time. And they were just evil. It's the same thing with voodoo. We talked about with Haiti and talked about in New Orleans, how this is voodoo, this is witchcraft. What they're doing is evil, and we got to stop them, or we got to convert them to the good side. You understand? And this is real, true spirituality. And I talked about how when you go back and look, they wiped out, completely got rid of all of the old ways. So when they got rid of people using, alchemy, people using anything, that went back to the old ways, they just made it evil. They just said, demonism, witchcraft, so on and so forth, used it as justification to go into these lands and conquer, and got people to accept that and follow them into conquest. So we got to understand, this is long ago. This is stuff that happened that was in the minds of people who are long gone. And if it's not taught, it's not going to be passed down. And we know that history, knowledge, is controlled by the conquerors, not the conquered. The conquered is dead and gone. The conquerors can now take over the civilization and put in place whatever history they want. And this is what happened. So we got to go and look and understand what took place. And I talked about this before in the many hidden accomplishments of African people on YouTube. So remember, we have today, we got the Moors, we got the Black Hebrew Israelites, both saying the same thing, that Europe was ruled by Black kings. Now, the Moors saying they were Moors, the Black Hebrews saying they were Hebrews. But the Moors is the ones that have more validity, because we can find Moorish everything when you go and look, and they hide this well. But we know, Europe was Black. It was ruled by Black kingdoms, and they didn't understand. It's the same thing in Africa. They would never fathom that this would turn into a Black-white thing. Today, it's like, oh no, we can see it. But see, back then, they were intermarrying, and there was a knowledge. They was able to understand. And it's something they could never fathom on a global scale, that this Black-white thing would be a huge issue on the scale that it is. And it will go to basically set, your status and who you can be and what you can do based upon your color. So they control history now, the conquerors. So they can go erase everything and hide everything. So to us now, of course, Europe is white, to the layperson, anybody who does study and understand what took place. But it says here, Princess Sophie Charlotte was born on this date in 1744. She was the second Black Queen of England. Philippa of Hainault was the first Black Queen of England. Charlotte was the 8th child of the Prince of Nero, Germany, Charles Louis Frederick, and his wife, Elisabeth Albertina of Saxe-Hildburghausen. In 1752, when she was 8 years old, Sophie Charlotte's father died. As Princess of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, Sophie Charlotte was descended directly from an African branch of the Portuguese royal house. Margarita de Castro Yasusa. 6 different lines can be traced from Princess Sophie Charlotte back to the Margarita de Castro Yasusa. George I of Great Britain's grandmother was Elizabeth Stewart, the Winter Queen of Bohemia, and the daughter of James VI of Scotland and James I of England. This is King James we're talking about. And subsequently, Great Britain. George I was the grandfather of Charlotte's eventual husband, King George III. As a Protestant and a descendant of the Stewart kings, he was chosen to become king. The long lineage of Scottish kings and queens is often sidelined in the ancestry of the current royal family. She married George III of England on September 8, 1761, at the Chapel Royal in St. James Palace, London, at the age of 17 years of age, becoming the Queen of England and Ireland. The conditions of the marriage contract were the young princess join the Anglican Church and be married according to the Anglican rites, and never ever involve herself in politics. Although the Queen had an interest in what was happening in the world, especially the wars in America, she fulfilled her marital agreement. The royal couple had 15 children, 13 of whom survived to adulthood. Their fourth eldest son was Edward Augustus, Duke of Kent, later fathered Queen Victoria. Queen Charlotte made many contributions to Britain as it is today, though the evidence is not obvious or well publicized. Her African bloodline in the British royal family is not common knowledge. Portraits of the Queen have been reduced to fiction of a black magi until two art historians suggested that the defined African features of the painting derived from actual subjects, not the minds of painters. And this is something that the Black Hebrews been talking about for a minute, about King James being black. And then, you understand that, yeah, it's a possibility of this being true. But of course, when we look at everything that's been put in place to cover that up, it's hard for people to accept that. But when you start to dig more, and that's the whole thing that has to happen, you got to set aside the bias and dig deeper. And when you dig deeper, there's so many people that talked about this black royal family, who talked about black people ruling. And this is hidden so deep and it's covered up so well, but it's there. And it's going to make sense in a second when we get to this point. But there are others, you gotta look at it. We've been here first. We had to been ruling. We know we were sophisticated. We know we were advanced people. We taught them this stuff. They got it from us. So you have to look at it as us having these wars, these problems. Nobody wants war. Nobody wants to deal with these issues. The best way to get by it is a treaty. Let's come together on the basis of religion. Okay, let's make peace by intermarrying. And that's how they got in. Another person, Elizabeth of Bohemia. The Protestant Negress Moorish Elizabeth Stewart, and I'm reading it straight from the book, so I just want to put the shot of the book here. Queen of Bohemia was the eldest daughter of James VI and the first of England, we know King James, and his dark-skinned Danish wife, Anne of Denmark. Now, I talked about this before, got dual citizenship in Sweden, and I talked about the black royal family in Sweden and how the last black royal member was the Black Queen, and they still celebrate her to this day. So there's validity to this because in Sweden, it's known. They know about the black royal family. They know about black people being there, and it's talked about. So Denmark used to be a part of Sweden. This used to be all same territory until they split up. But Denmark, it makes sense, especially since Denmark is, real close, right next to Sweden. So the Danish wife, Anne of Denmark, Elizabeth, who was also called Winter Queen, became Queen of Bohemia, Czech Republic, in AD after marrying the admirable black-skinned Frederick V. Elector Palatine, a marriage that was politically arranged in order to strengthen an alliance between England and German Protestants. See, this is how they got in. Alliances, intermarrying. The Queen, with that typical Stuart color, upon giving birth to her first son, Prince Frederick Henry, happily described him to her father, King James of England, to be a petite little black baby, who favored his father's dark coloring. There were several other children of the Queen, such as Princess Elizabeth. Okay. The Protestant Negro Moorish King Charles Stewart I was the son of James IV, or James VI and the First, and his dark-skinned Danish wife, Anne of Denmark, who we just talked about. Charles became ruler of England in AD 1625 following the death of his father. The king, who suffered from a severe speech impediment, married the dark-skinned Henrietta Maria, the daughter of the black-skinned Queen Marie de Medici of France. The couple had 7 children, with 3 sons and 3 daughters to survive infancy. In AD 1642, Charles fought a civil war, which years later he was defeated and captured. During his trial, he was found guilty and beheaded. His son Charles II continued the Stuart line in AD 1685. King Charles I is the 8th great-grand-uncle of Elizabeth II. Char, or Char of Charles, means darky, black, or nigger, or niger, the same as charcoal. So Charles means black. It's one of the things that they cite. Now, we talked about Saint Maurice in previous videos, being the black saint. Now, again, this gives so much more validity to everything when you understand we have this Saint Maurice who was so well known that it makes sense that, this, whole black people going around being the leaders and rulers and main pushers of the church in the beginning is true. Now, An article here I was reading about says, what were Black experiences in Europe like before the arrival of the transatlantic slave trade? How did medieval Europeans view the continent of Africa? And that's one of the things it's saying, what were their experiences like before the transatlantic slave trade? You know, implying that we was there, like we was in Europe before that, because they want to say we just came straight from Africa. We was in Europe. We was ruling the shit. Where did the Black Saint Maurice and the Black Magus come from? Think about that. And why have they persisted into the present? Discover the travels and lives of Africans in German-speaking Europe as they interacted with painters, writers, emperors, and priests, often labeled as Moors. Many Black figures stood at the intersection between religion, Islamic Christianity, and culture, coming from exotic lands full of riches and the promises of new alliances. The Moor in the European imagination symbolized the ambition of Christian universalism and the expansion of European empires. And this is a newer article, and more stuff like this is going to start to come out as they try to bring us together. You understand that what it's saying. Okay, you go and look. St. Maurice is all over Germany. Plain and simple. We're talking about German-speaking Black people. You go to Germany, I've been there, and you see statues of the Moors. You see it. It's there. You see the Moors constantly talking about this. And you have to remember this. The whole thing with Meghan Merkel, when she married Prince Harry. Remember the whole big thing when the Princess of Kent wore the Moorish brooch. And everybody spazzed out and said, oh, it was racist. She was being racist. How was she being racist? She is showing you who they took the kingdom from, who was there first.